give me everything. Everything. How deep Ian McDiarmid's voice is.
Oh,
in that,
man.
too,
It is
like
insane.
It's regular Palpatine, but even more just rotten.
It really is more rotten.
Yeah, soured with age.
Kill the girl.
Yeah.
It's almost a little Unkar plot. Get that droid.
It is. People with that deal of voice
Well,
is
Simon Pegg.
crazy. I love
That's
it.
great.
Anyway,
we rolling?
welcome back to the Star Wars Guys podcast. And when I say welcome back, it's been a while.
Been a
It's been a
minute.
little bit.
It's been quite a few
They
weeks.
got married.
I did.
Hey.
I got married, and I'm back.
He's back.
And I'm back. It's been a great few weeks of a break, but we're back. We're excited to be back. There's a lot of news to talk about, and we're talking Andor Season 2. We've
Talking
got
Andor
some
Season 2, a little Kathleen Kennedy first.
Kathleen Kennedy.
Got a
We've
lot.
got
Not
some
my Kathy.
Andor trailer. We've got some Andor behind the scenes. We've got a lot to break down and discuss. Some Kathy. Not my Kathy.
Not my Kathy.
We got some Kathy to talk about. What's going on at Lucasfilm. We're here for it. So we're excited. It's a good one. We're glad to be back. And let's get into it.
Let's get into it.
What do we
So,
want to start with?
we'll start with Kathleen Kennedy.
Yeah.
Because this is the big. We knew Andor Season 2 was coming, so it's not a
Right.
huge breaking news thing that we got a new trailer and we got stuff.
Yeah.
Even though we want to talk about it, 'cause
Right.
it looks fantastic.
We knew it was coming.
The Kathleen Kennedy, the news. So many of you, if you're watching this, you might have heard, you might not have heard, but Kathleen Kennedy. There was a report. It had come out first on social media that it was reported by, I think, Puck News and then Variety, and I think Hollywood Reporter had a follow up to it, and then there was a final piece, which was a deadline interview by Kathleen Kennedy, kind of setting the record
Yeah.
straight as far as her future at Lucasfilm and other things going on. But
Right.
the news is that the initial report is that Kathleen Kennedy, the president of Lucasfilm, will be stepping out of her role, will no longer be the president. I think the initial report was like by the end of the year, I think
Mhm.
is what they initially said.
Yeah.
So what ended up happening initially when that news comes out, there are people who blame her for
People are saying she's
Everything.
fired.
yeah, so people saying she's fired.
She is the one who knocks, just
Bob,
so you know.
yeah, Bob Iger has
Yeah.
Get fired, Kennedy.
pushed her aside. Like Bob Iger retired 2 years ago and then came back because of the
Right.
disaster that was going on with Bob Chapek. when
Right.
everything that was
Yeah,
going on, and they were
yeah.
losing like hundreds of millions of dollars at a time, like fast. He came back in. He has a long-standing relationship with Kathleen Kennedy.
Yeah.
But there was all this speculation as far as what happened, and before there was even any reporting on the news of someone who is in her 70s, sometime in the near future, stepping down from a presidential role in the company. Before there was
Yeah.
any really follow-up to that, there was, of course, a lot of people on the internet that are that started celebrating and yay, the only reason Star Wars isn't exactly what I personally want it to be is because of one person, Kathleen Kennedy, which we are defenders of Kathy on here.
Yeah.
We also are honest in that, yeah, we think that it's been a little bit of a more rocky production road as of late than they had in the first maybe 7-8 years of
Yeah.
Lucasfilm being owned by Disney. Sure. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of it has been super public, and I think there's a lot of companies that deal with this stuff behind the scenes.
Behind the scenes, yeah.
But yeah, there's we'll go into the specifics here, but when for us three first, we know what some of the people online thought, but what's your initial reaction? For both of you guys? We'll start with Uncle. What is your initial reaction when you just see that initial headline that reports our Kathleen Kennedy will no longer be president at Lucasfilm, possibly by the end of the year, or
Sad.
yeah,
Sad. It's easy to blame someone for success
For success.
because
Yes.
because largely what some diehards may not love has actually been the sequels have been very successful. They have the
Yeah.
Episode 7's number 5 all time.
yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
And it's what is it domestically still has the record, like
think
no
maybe.
maybe like no in
Maybe so.
I think in
Does
the
it?
domestic
Oh, wow.
market, like is the some unreal number
Right.
that they're like, I don't know if it'll ever be beat. Yeah.
So and because you don't necessarily like certain decisions, you think you just throw out the head. But I was sad because she's created movies that I've my whole life,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and I've liked a lot of the things that they've done. And
Yeah.
there's a fear because you think, oh no, great, she's gone. Well, now who's gonna?
Yeah. No.
I can't think of a name.
I feel like
Yes.
sometimes
You
people
were going to talk about
who's
that too.
gonna take care of us?
people think that it's this person who they don't like, or for whatever reason they don't like
Right.
the direction they're going.
Right.
That means we're gonna get someone better, or
That's right.
someone that's gonna produce and create and make the things that I want to make.
And,
What happens when someone steps in?
Yeah.
And from a fan standpoint, it doesn't really feel like much changed. What then what?
Right.
It's like, oh, we're still getting these same
I have a thought
type
on that
of
as well.
movies,
That's such
the
a great
same-
point.
We're
As-
still getting
I know.
projects that are getting leaked that end up not coming to fruition. Like it's
That's
Star
gonna happen to
Wars. It's
anybody.
gonna happen. Yeah.
Kathy's DNA traces directly back to the creator.
To
Mhm.
George.
And
Yeah.
as much as we love Andor, if Tony Gilroy was running the place, I would be afraid that we'd go
Yes.
off the rails
Yeah.
because it's not a deep
No, that's not the
love
same.
of
Yeah.
Star Wars. He's a
Yeah.
filmmaker.
Yeah.
He's a genius.
And for better or worse, Gilroy has even openly said,
That's right.
Like, oh, I don't even.
I don't really picture.
I don't necessarily love this stuff like some of like the nerds do.
That's
Like,
right.
he's like,
Yeah.
he's
Exactly.
just making and like
He's like,
for-
I'm just making
and
a
what's-
story that happens to be
what's
in
funny
the
is
Star
for
Wars
an
world.
individual
Right.
project like this, like
It's perfect.
I really couldn't care. Like, yeah, if that's, I don't even care what your mindset is. If that's what it's produced, but that's not a shepherd
wanna
to guide our flock moving
yes.
No.
forward.
And
That's,
I want to
here's
know
the
the
thing,
ship
that's a
is
great
going in a
point.
direction connected to the roots.
yes.
Yeah, and that's a great point because we're going to talk about Andor here in a minute. We got Derpy in the chat saying the revolution starts now, so welcome.
Yes, it does.
So we'll talk about Andor, but that's a good point because has it gotten to the point where now, from a fan base perspective, it's kind of well known Andor has become elevated to like Andor is like the peak Star Wars show. A lot of people kind of have put it on that pedestal.
Yeah.
It is, and as much as I agree with that, I love Andor. It probably is my favorite of the Star Wars television shows. Do I want the feeling and the themes of Andor and the tones of Andor to be every Star Wars project? No. I
Mm-mm.
love it, and I think it's great for the story it's
Yeah.
telling.
Yeah.
But I also love Ahsoka and the mystic behind the
Yeah.
world between worlds, and the fact that it can all be part of this galaxy I think fits really well, and that's what makes each show different
Yeah.
and enjoyable, that I don't have to look at it and be like intently listening to every intentional dialogue and
Mhm.
being like, wow, the dialogue and stuff in Andor, I remember from the first season, was just incredible.
Yeah.
Felt like every single word was extremely thought out and intentional, and then I can watch a different show and be like, maybe don't feel the same way, but I also love the
Mhm.
content we're getting because it's different.
Right.
And so, yeah, you're totally right. I mean, having someone that can kind of see the variety of what Star Wars is about and having those direct ties to George,
Yeah.
because George saw it that way, it's sad to see that,
Right.
um,
I think great artists at any level, it's all about when you're creating something artistic. The challenge is to know when you're finished with that piece of art, when that work is
Yes.
finished.
yes.
Because you overpaint. Because I used to write songs. You overwrite. You overdo things.
You overcreate.
until it gets manipulated. And there's a little bit of criticism from George doing that with the original.
Yeah.
But I think one of the things that Kathleen Kennedy has that's been so powerful is an ability to guide the ship with freedom, to let people create.
Yeah.
And sometimes it doesn't come out exactly like we all want,
Mm-hmm.
but it's a guidance that it's always seemed to be strong but gentle. Like we let people build into themselves and grow and
Yeah.
develop, rather than a heavy-handed, everything has to be a certain way. And I think I like that.
Yeah.
So what both you guys are saying, this is not my original thought. So I'm just giving credit. I actually heard, I think, on the Force Center podcast. I think
Great podcast.
I think it it was either Ken or Joseph who had brought up, but this is a good example, I think, as far as what we're talking about of when we look at a replacement, because it's easy. It's always there's a lot of sports analogies too of like
For sure.
the team's not winning.
Fire Andy Reid.
Yeah.
That's it. So
Yeah.
like,
Oh,
okay,
okay.
and who's gonna replace Andy Reid? Like that's
Yeah.
exactly like there's. That's
Yeah,
always
who are
get
you
them out, and then
expecting
you
to
look at
step
the
up
pool
and-
of who's
Right.
the backup or who fills in that, and you're like, oh, well,
Is
there's a
that
reason
gonna be
why
is that
all of
gonna
a sudden
change
you
it?
make a big change and it doesn't immediately fix
Yeah.
things
Yeah.
when you're replacing like a legend. But they used a great example of, well, one, it gets into in this Deadline interview that we'll get to in a second of Kathy talking about the actual specifics of this job, because I think a lot of people forget that Lucasfilm works hand in hand with its parent company, Disney.
Mm-hmm.
She has to work with shareholders.
Mhm.
She has to talk with them. She has to talk with executives and Bob Iger. And this is not Kathy sitting in her office daydreaming about fun Star Wars stories
we
and this. She's
Right.
like looking at all of she's going through business presentations and doing like there's so many things to her job that are not the creative side
Mm-hmm.
that you need, like whatever you think of Kathy's recent years in Star Wars, and we're fans, and we're really big fans of hers. There is no doubt that she is a first ballot Hall of Fame, if there was a Hall of Fame of Hollywood,
Yeah.
first ballot
Yeah.
Hall of Famer producer. And we've texted in our group chat the list of things that she's produced it, and it's even more than you even remember. Like
Oh yeah.
whether it's Jurassic Park, Goonies, Indiana Jones, number of
Yeah.
Indiana Jones movies, number of Back to the Future movies, The Color Purple. It doesn't even matter what, like any type of Schindler's List,
I know.
like
She's
any type of
produced all
movie,
of that.
Hook. There's
Mhm.
so many things that she's made over the years. But so because of that, though, she is a Hollywood icon, for sure. She is one of the most
Yeah.
successful people in the history of Hollywood.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And they said on this podcast, they made a great example of, it's easy to sit there and go, okay, Lorne Michaels is getting older. He's going to retire sometime soon for
Right.
Saturday Night Live.
Right.
yeah.
And it's easy to go, yeah, so-and-so is a hilarious comedian.
Oh, he would.
Oh,
be
he
great.
was great.
Right.
She was a great writer on the show.
Kate
he would
McKinnon,
be-
let her run this
Yeah,
show.
exactly. Like,
yeah.
this is, and then, like, and this could be,
Will Ferrell.
someone could be a great, like, the funniest person you know. Like,
Right.
and
Yeah.
for the example of Star Wars, it could be someone, whether it's and this is not to knock, like if it does become a Filoni
Yeah.
or someone like
That's
that,
what I'm. Yeah.
they are not an icon. Like he is, like, so there is a little bit of a worry of
The
you
skill
have to
set
have
needed is
Lorne Michaels, for better or worse. It has the pull that when NBC says we do this, he's like, I'm Lorne Bleepin
right.
Michaels.
Right.
Like, you don't just force me, and
Mhm.
sometimes he'll win those battles in his, and sometimes he'll lose them. But he'll have
Mhm.
the battle because he's Lorne Michaels.
Yeah.
Kathy's the same way.
Mhm.
Of she's not going to just get. They don't just
Yeah.
say executives higher up say this. You're like, oh, okay, whatever. She's like, I've produced movies for over 50 years.
Mhm.
Yeah, sometimes I'm going to take your advice. Sometimes I'm also going to, like, I know when to use my cachet to try to steer our ship in the right direction. And
Yeah.
again, does it mean she's flawless? No. Does it mean there's been some things that could have been handled differently? Sure. But it makes me a little bit nervous of just whoever's coming in.
Yeah. Who's gonna?
If
fill
we
the
just
shoes?
think of it as who is the person that can come out there with the storyboards and guide the story in the right direction that we would like, there is something that gets you excited about, like, yeah, sometimes a different creative person inserted into a role can add a little juice to it and can switch stuff up, and that can be great. But also there's a lot more to Kevin Feige's job.
Yeah.
I mean, use DC as an example.
Right.
Yeah.
James Gunn, it's James Gunn and Peter Safran.
Yeah.
So they have a guy who literally just does the executive stuff,
Mhm.
and James Gunn does all the creative stuff.
Mhm.
And because they're like, this is two different jobs.
That's right.
Kathy's doing it as one.
Right.
Feige does it as one.
Yeah.
And even through all the success, even Feige gets hated on these days of like, oh, this movie was
Yeah. MCU's
this
falling
movie
apart.
wasn't great, so he's spread too thin. He's got this. He needs to like. The dude had like 30 flawless as far as
Yeah.
successful.
Dude
Right.
ran for 20 years straight
like,
on Marvel without.
This is
a
what
miss.
happens. So, it is easier to always say the grass is greener on the other side,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
but again, for her, like, yeah, there is a sadness, but also like I am happy for her that she won't be taking as many arrows just shot at
That's
her all
true.
the time. But just
Yeah.
like,
And what
it's
a career.
the scapegoat of whenever something happens.
Yeah.
Like, they also talked about on the podcast, while there have been a number of production things that have gone wrong in recent years that we've even been like, it's really disappointing. There's also a lot of things that were outside of her control, almost like an actual like, president of the United States who like all of a sudden you happen like you're there and then something falls in your lap and you're like, well, this is going to kill approval ratings because there's not much we can do with it.
Yeah.
In the last few years, when they haven't had any Star Wars movies, they've had all in the same time a global pandemic with COVID. You had a writer's strike and an actor's strike.
Yeah.
And that's following
And a CEO change at Disney.
CEO changed from Iger to Chapek to back to Iger, all in that same amount of time. And then you look
that's
and you're
true.
like, well, of course the last 6 years has been a little bit messy
Rocky.
as far as getting movies produced because there's a lot of people who tried to plow through that and put out some movies through the pandemic and they
it's
bombed
also,
or they just didn't make much money.
It's also not again, not saying that she's perfect and that obviously there's mistakes and I think there's things that could have been done and handled differently. And I think we all agree about that stuff in our own lives too. But I think it's a good reminder that even when it comes to writers and directors that are brought onto these, it's not like they're just handpicking and that person's either available or gives the type of script that they think that they want. Like they might give something and you're like, this is not actually, or even they themselves get to a point where they're like, I can't take this on, or this is not really my vision, so we're parting ways. I mean, there's so many variables.
We'll have to dive into the interview now because she mentioned specifically Taika in the interview.
Yeah.
And Mangold. And it's really good stuff. So
let's get into it.
It's right on that. So
let's get into it.
So just a few days ago.
So this is big time like future Star Wars stuff.
Big time future Star Wars. This is like if she had one quote from this, we would have been like, oh, that's what we're talking about in the next podcast.
This just to be clear.
This is Kathleen Kennedy.
Recent interview.
Deadline. So
with Deadline.
I screenshot a bunch of the paragraphs, but I didn't catch the writer's name. But it's a reporter from Deadline that apparently she has a relationship with. He in the intro of the article said like, I caught up with Kathleen Kennedy on the before she was heading out to. So it sounded, I think it was a phone interview, but heading out to some awards show. But
the Oscars.
It wasn't the Oscars. It was before that.
But
it was
okay.
But so it's kind of framed in what feels like at first like, so I kind of caught her in this is and that's kind of the way this business works, to make it feel like this is kind of like a nonchalant thing or whatever. Clearly by her answers, this is an orchestrated and I mean this positively, like she was whether she initiated or not, they decided let's get out now. Let's address this head on. Let's talk about this, and then also she gives a very measured, I feel like, thorough explanations for a lot of these answers. It doesn't feel like a red carpet interview of like, so Star Wars is a disaster. What do you think? Well, disaster. What do you mean? Like she's giving paragraph responses. This is a long thing. So, a number of quotes here. We'll go through and we'll do this as fast as possible. But I also like the way that the reporter says some of the stuff. It sounds like very kind of everyman questions, meaning it's not like some super diplomatic questions. Some of them are like, hey, people have had a problem like with your 10-year Lucasfilm. Like, what do you like? He's almost like not skating around the issues sometimes. So, first question from Deadline: we've all read these speculative reports that you are out. That there's a frenzy for the next person who's going to take over Lucasfilm. So, what is the truth? And Kathy says, the truth is, and I want to just say out loud and clear, I am not retiring. I will never retire from making movies. I will die making movies. That is the first thing that's important. I am not retiring. What's happening at Lucasfilm is I have been talking for quite some time with Bob and Alan about the eventual succession and what that might look like. We have an amazing bench of people here, and we have every intention of making an announcement months or a year down the road. We are in lockstep as to what that's going to be, and I am continuing. I am producing the Mandalorian movie right now, and I'm also producing Sean Levy's movie, which is after that. which is interesting. We'll talk about
Some
because
clarity.
Lucasfilm's never made a single comment on Sean Levy doing a movie yet. It's only been Variety, Hollywood Reporter. This is
Yeah,
straight
true,
from Kathy
true.
saying it's happening and it's the next
And
one after
she's on it,
Mandalorian.
yeah.
True.
So I'm continuing to stay on at Lucasfilm and looking very thoughtfully with Bob and Alan as to who's stepping in, and that is all underway, and we have every right to make that announcement when we want to make it. So first thing, not retiring. She's making movies. She's going to continue making movies.
But the talks have been
the talks
have been put in place.
They've been put in place, and
Yeah.
they're figuring that out, and they'll make an announcement possibly in the coming months, up to a year. But the Sean Levy, all of a sudden, the fact that she went there. Also, she didn't have to go there. The question didn't ask specifically
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
Sean Levy at
Yeah.
all, and she said,
Yeah.
I'm staying on to do the Mandalorian movie, and then also Sean Levy's movie, which is after that. Like, she immediately gives us
Yeah.
a timetable, a timeline,
Yeah.
which is exciting because we did talk about when the Ryan Gosling portion of that got broken. We're
Right.
like, ooh, I feel like this is being moved up the
It's
slot.
going
This
fast.
is moving up the
Yeah.
pecking order here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Next part that you are looking within seems to give credence to what we have heard. That an executive chief creative officer like Dave Filoni is in a good position as he works on a Star Wars to write and direct. And Kennedy says, I can't say who it is because there's just an internal process that goes on inside a large corporation and a publicly held company as to how we go about making deals, finalizing decisions, making announcements. There's nothing unusual about that, but we are in that process now. And then Deadline follows up, this flurry of press coverage, it sounds like chaos. What's the reality? And she said, chaos? Question mark. There's never been any chaos because we've known exactly what the plan is. I also like her phrasing here because people that are like, you don't know what the plan, like
Yeah.
the people that
Yeah.
she's like, we've always known what the plan is.
Yeah.
And we've been talking about it, and as I've said, nonstop for the last couple of years for obvious reasons. I'm not going to be here forever. George asked me 13 years ago to step in, and I am looking at who's going to replace me. As I've said, we have a bench of people internally to handle the business, the creative side. The job has grown also since I stepped in it. There was no streaming when I came on. There weren't a lot of things that we're involved in right now, so it has certainly grown. That's another thing people don't
true.
realize is George
George wasn't doing
handle
any
streaming.
of
Like
that.
he's big into technology, but like that would have been a whole different part of a business.
Yeah.
That he's like
That's
now
another
he's doing
job.
the TV and he's doing. George has not like had ever in Star Wars multiple things in the fire at one time.
No, it was
George
always
was
one
never.
movie.
It was the movie. It's the next movie, and then when we got to Clone Wars. Now we're doing Clone Wars, but he wasn't like, yeah, we're gonna do Clone Wars. I'm gonna go pop in over here. Oh, the Boba Fett movie looking great, and like it's
Yeah.
it's a different, it's just a
That's
different
true.
job. A couple more things here. How far down the road do you? Because this starts getting really interesting. How far down the road do you expect before a change gets made, and then you go off and produce these two big Star Wars things you mentioned? Kennedy says we'll probably make an announcement months or a year out, and I have every intention of sticking around to help that person be successful. I am already producing the Mandalorian movie, and Sean Levy's is after that. So she keeps coming back to
Yeah.
Mandalorian, Sean Levy, Mandalorian, Sean Levy. A Deadline says, I recall these same retirement predictions were rendered a year ago. That's kind of a shot at the one guy who said it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you re-upped, and yet here you are. What do you make of this fixation on your job status?
Wow. Okay.
She said, I truly don't know. And any discussion previously about me retiring or quitting or any of those things, that's complete rumor mill because through all these reports, I have just continued doing my job and continuing my contract. Nothing unusual, so that has all just been manufactured. It's again, so it's shot at the guy who was like,
Yeah.
she's
yeah.
retiring, she's out. Oh, she's out. See, I told you she's out. Well, if you say it 5 years in a row, eventually you're going to be right. She's in her
Yeah.
70s.
Yeah. See, I
Um,
broke that news.
Yeah, it's like,
Told
okay. The connotation is that you're being Deadline here. The connotation is that you're being pushed aside, in need of being replaced. Though that is not what I've heard. This is what the Deadline said.
Wow.
And Kennedy said it's absolutely not the case. It could not be further from the truth. And everything that we do inside of Lucasfilm is in lockstep and in communication with Disney. We all know what is going on. The communication has been completely collaborative, as you would expect. This is a big piece of business for them, and they want to empower me to help them make that decision and that choice. I am doing that. This is an interesting one. Deadline says, I am placing some of the blame. This is the guy. I am placing some of the blame on Marvel's Kevin Feige because he had that magnificent streak of superhero hits and set an impossibly high bar. But now he's starting to even take shrapnel. How daunting is it to run a company based on beloved and iconic IP? What has been the most challenging thing about running Lucasfilm when fans of the original trilogy measure everything against it and don't see the business need of broadening the franchise when Disney paid so much for it? It's what Amazon MGM will now go through as it expands the James Bond universe, which, by the way, James Bond rights were just purchased.
Yeah.
She said, I think it is something I think about all the time. It's fascinating to think how you sustain a brand, especially Star Wars, which is just about to celebrate its 50th anniversary. And so to analyze and understand what was inspiring George when he first created Star Wars, when he was still looking at Saturday matinees and Buck Rogers and Flash Gordon and those things of the past and politically, what he was reflecting in his stories. Because Star Wars has always had a kind of world building, and it reflects a certain amount of our society.
True.
You're trying to... Okay. The world, needless to say, is changing by the second, and consequently, the audience has changed dramatically as well. How they consume things. We're seeing this reflected in the health of the movie industry as a whole, and what really means for streaming, and what are all these other platforms that may be on the horizon. You're trying to look forward, and at the same time, you're trying to create stories that feel familiar. So you're moving into the future, and you're maintaining a sense of familiarity, and I think that is the hardest balance, which we've talked about. I just like that she's like, it's a moving target.
How do you simultaneously move and adapt to the future, creating new stories while trying to capture the nostalgia of what the franchise is about? Yeah, that's challenging.
Exactly. I'll skip to just the kind of more kind of groundbreaking things here. Deadline says, I broke a piece last fall about Simon Kinberg making a deal to write and produce a Star Wars trilogy. How's that going? She said, we are absolutely rolling fast and furiously with that. That has gone exceptionally well, and he's literally going to script as we speak. That's exciting, just for a trilogy. He's already going to script. We'll see something probably around June. So they're getting a script around June. As far as for the first one, Simon, if you remember, he did some. This is kind of funny how she words this. He did some work with us years ago with the animated show, Rebels. I like this. He's like with the animated show. Which was a really wonderful collaborative experience. And then he got very, very, very busy with X-Men, and then recently became available again, and he segued into this space beautifully. So we are really excited where that's headed. And Deadline said, these are spin-offs, and then there is the core... Oh, there are spin-offs, and then there is the core Star Wars story broken into trilogies. Is this a continuation of that? She says... This is the next iteration, the new saga that moves us into the future, which makes it feel like this is the 789 basically. 789 is the new. You might have a little bit of the characters, but this is like the 789 for us. I'm saying was.
Well, does she mean?
Star Wars.
Does she mean the future of Star Wars or the future in the in-world galaxy?
I think both. This is not just this is the next step in
Skywalker
that story.
Saga's
this
done.
Is the next iteration.
This is
the next saga.
This is
And then Deadline says, and the one by Deadpool and Wolverine director Sean Levy? ? She said that's also in the future. It's all post first. It's all now she gets the story. It's all post first 9.
Okay.
Sean's is a standalone Star Wars story that'll take place post 9, maybe 5 or 6 years out. Now she's given all specifics.
5 or 6 years
post
after
episode 9.
5 or 6 years after Palps gets zapped.
And Mandalorian really stands on its own because there we're dealing with the whole other era in the New Republic for the Mandalorian. We have other development going on in that space as well, so that's the space that we're pretty much focused on right at the moment because obviously with Mandalorian we have a pretty good sense of where it's going, and with this, the Kinberg trilogy, it's all pretty much new characters. We may bring in some characters from the sequel, bring back some characters from the sequel trilogy, but pretty much new characters, which is interesting. So whether like a Rey character or anything would be attached to it, she's not the lead. Doesn't sound like that. This is she might be in an Obi-Wan role.
She's the Obi-Wan role, yeah.
I think this is the last couple things here.
Wow.
So how many? This is so revealing too. How many development type projects do you have percolating at the moment that you feel confident will turn into something down the line? She said To play it safe, I'd say 3 or 4 at the moment. And a large part
That's
of
a
it.
good question.
That's very I don't hear people ask you
No,
that.
I don't
Like, you have a lot
yeah.
of you say you have a lot of stuff in development. How many of these things?
How many are
Do you
you
think
confident
matter?
about that you think or
She
know
said
will
to play
happen?
it safe, I'd say 3 or 4 at the moment. And a large part of it, Mike. Well, she's talking to me now. Hi,
Yeah.
Kathy, is who is the talent that we're attaching to it, and that's a challenge in and of itself these days because people are getting really busy. So you find yourself having to wait a lot with a top talent doing streaming and movies now. They're juggling their schedules. And when you do Star Wars, you pretty much have to step into it and not have any other competing work going on. It's a good 2 or 3 years minimum commitment, and that's tough to get top talent to be able to carve out that kind of time in their schedule. So that is a part of the challenge as well. And
Yeah.
Deadline says, you've still got the prequel with James Mangold, whose Oscar-nominated Bob Dylan movie, A Complete Unknown, is being talked about right now. Kennedy, yep, he is working on the script right now. Simon is working on his scripts right now. Sean, we've been working with him already for about a year and a half. So Sean Lee, we've been working with for a while. Year and a half, which is funny because he was saying, like, even last year, like, I got a Star Wars movie, and everyone's like, he said that nowhere? No, he's talking
Yeah.
about that.
Which makes you wonder, like, from us, it seemed like, oh, wow, this came up out of nowhere. They've got Ryan Gosling. They've got these people signed on. Like, oh, wow, this is quick. When in reality, they're like, it just was one of the projects that didn't get leaked early, like
Right.
these other things did.
And that
all
they
out
had
there.
already been having these talks to them well before Deadpool and Wolverine came out. It was
Yeah.
a massive success.
That's actually, that
It could have
makes-
been during the process.
that honestly
they
makes
knew
me more excited about it, that it wasn't just, oh, Deadpool,
Like a
Wolverine's good, let's
reactionary.
get this guy.
Yeah.
It was
Right.
like, no, we
he has
trust
a cool
Yeah, he's
vision
been
or a cool
working.
We know
pitch.
this guy. He's got a good vision. He's done some other projects that we like. He's been successful. Not just. It seems like some of that news always comes out after a director
Mhm.
has a big
Mm-hmm.
project. Then that stuff comes out. But like you said, most of these I'm sure were in the works before. Like even
Already.
Taika was probably in the works
Yeah.
before some of the success that he was having, and
Mhm.
then.
I know this is
don't know.
long, so I'll try to wrap this up quickly. But I can't skip a couple of these, like these that are big. That are explaining stuff. She said these guys are available. These guys are available now. James Mangold, he got delayed a bit because of the Dylan movie and awards season. Obviously, you have to accommodate top talent to a certain extent, and quality is so important with what it is we're trying to do. I like to wait for people that I think are passionate and are really good to step into Star Wars. And Deadline then says, any others that I've forgotten? Asked her again, is that you named those? Anyone else? She said, well, I keep waiting for Taika. As she said, I keep waiting for Taika, and he is working with another writer right now, but he's so busy. I love him. I think if we ever do get a script from Taika, it's going to be fantastic. I already saw a first act that I loved, but tying him down, it's tricky.
She
They
pretty
announced-
much calls out Taika
Yeah,
of like,
she's like,
we're waiting. We
yeah.
still want Taika. We're just waiting.
By the way,
on
the
him.
breaking news here is that Taika, who is announced to be doing a movie, announced in 2020, is through his first act of his script writing. He's written one act, which again, I'm not saying script writing is easy, but like he's
That's
5
hilarious.
years in, he's written one act.
And
of
it's
that,
not
so
from someone who's been totally random. He was involved heavily in Mandalorian.
yeah, she's like, we've been trying. She's like, we love him, but he just keeps doing other stuff.
he had a role,
Mhm.
and he had a directing role, like a character role,
Right.
and a directing role with Mando. So it's not like Star Wars is brand new to him.
And on
Right.
Taika, Deadline says, I still remember seeing his Thor Ragnarok, entering with low expectations and then watching his exuberant vision and thinking, quote, this is what you want when you go to a movie theater on a Saturday night. And Kennedy says, it's so true, and that's exactly the tone we're always looking for with filmmakers who can pull that off. It's not like they're a dime a dozen. We're really trying to find the diamond in the rough, and he is one of them. And then Deadline said, so even when you hand the reins to Lucasfilm protege, it sounds like you're going to be in that world for, what, 8, 10 years? Is that fair? She said, well, I don't know if I'm going to say that, but yeah, it's possible. That's a lot. This guy randomly was like,
This
8,
guy
10
just
years?
throws out
Yeah.
10 years.
Um,
So you'll be, what, 90 and still in here? Well, I don't.
106.
he said, any regrets? She said, no, I mean, far from regrets. I've loved the challenge of stepping into space and literally space and being with Star Wars for over the years, taking on the challenges of expanding Star Wars. I've loved working with Disney, and the company has been fantastic and it's supported the IP. They've expanded in ways I don't think George could have even imagined. It's been such a learning experience. I've never been an executive before. I'm a filmmaker through and through, which I think people forget. She's an executive now. I even approached the executive role as a filmmaker. I love working with filmmakers. That is my lifeblood. It's what I enjoy more than anything, and it's being able to do that inside of Star Wars that's really been fun, because we have people who step into Star Wars who are diehard fans, and we have people who step into Star Wars who never really even knew the IP that well. And you look at someone like Tony Gilroy. Tony doesn't know
Nice
Star Wars.
segue.
You look at someone like Tony Gilroy. He has done transformative, exceptional. She's like, you have fans, and then you have Tony Gilroy. He has done a transformative, exceptional work, and I've been working with Tony for more than a decade. I don't think Tony would ever have ever have imagined he'd be around for this long to do Star Wars.
Yeah.
I don't think he'd ever that creative experience on Andor has been fantastic, and his second season is coming out next month. That's where the satisfaction comes for me. It's just hope that it continues. Last couple quotes right here, and it's done.
Okay.
Do you think you can get him to do more in Star Wars after this, especially after all of his success on Rogue One? She said, I don't know if I can. I don't think he's ever believed he'd be a decade inside of Star Wars. He's writing some things on his own, and I think he'd like to get back into the director's chair, so we'll see what he does, but he's such a talent, just fantastic. And the guy said, he's also provided the creative spine for the Bourne Identity. And she said, yeah, that's how we all met. Final 2 questions. Will you step out as Lucasfilm boss this year? She said, we really don't know at this stage. There's so much going on, Mike. I don't know. And when this happens, who will make the decision? She said, me. It's my decision. This is 100% my decision. End of the article. So,
That's
a lot
good.
there. I
A
know
lot
it was
there.
long, but a couple things that jump out at me right away. The things she mentioned and the things she did not mention. So, he even pressed, anything we've forgotten? And she goes to Taika. Unfortunately, there's no mention of this Rey New Jedi Order film in this article whatsoever, with Charmin Obaid-Chinoy as the director,
Right.
Stephen Knight, who
Yeah,
would
she didn't
come
even
in.
talk about Daisy Ridley.
I
No.
almost said Phil Knight. Phil Knight, the
Didn't even
creative
mention
owner
it.
of Nike,
Phil
stepping
Knight.
in.
That's right. He's going to run it.
No mention of Daisy in it. Now, I do think it's possible that, because Daisy had those comments of like, yeah, stuff's changing. I'm so excited for the new ones. So it makes it think like she might have some involvement in the Kinberg thing, maybe.
I think so.
But as someone who was really, and we've known
Which was
that,
the original rumor when that first came out, before the standalone
before
Rey
the
movie
standalone
even
was
happened.
even-
It was she's going to be involved in the new trilogy.
it was before. Yeah, it was before. Not before the standalone was announced, because the standalone, those were announced on stage before the trilogy was.
Right, but I mean
it
the
was
rumors.
before the announcement, though, that's true, and then before the announcement that the Rey standalone was on hold, there then was reports of like, yeah, but maybe there's a couple projects that have Rey in it that are being talked about.
Yeah.
So, no mention of a Lando movie, which again I
True.
That's not that surprising.
I've
I am
done-
actually more surprised that she mentioned Taika. That she's like still possible, but she
Right.
even said if we get a script.
Yeah, she's like it's on. She basically said, "Taika, this is on you."
yeah, like we love
Blame
you, Taika, but like we literally had you on stage, and
And
you're
you've-
one act into writing your movie. So I know that was a lot. What's biggest things that jumped out of you there, or there's some announcements on the Sean Levy stuff? Or,
I think
or her. What stands out
for
from the
me,
article?
and I know
the
I'm
interview.
short on time, but for me, I think the biggest thing is the broad picture of just the transparency of addressing some of the projects that have been either leaked, not even officially announced by Lucasfilm, but she's here talking about them and addressing some of these things. Like, she didn't have to throw Taika information out there. She didn't have to throw some of these things out there, and they weren't even directly asked about, but she did because she knows that these are things that are being talked about amongst the fandom, and she,
Yeah.
either was prepared or felt comfortable enough that she knew she could address some of those things. So
Yeah. Uncle, anything
There
jumps
is
out to you
there is some truth to the fact that they're talking about who's going to take her place.
Yeah.
yeah,
So when that's done, they may be moving into that role.
yeah,
But she's going to keep making. I think she wants to make other stuff too. I mean,
I do. It sounds like she kind of wants to.
She probably wants to go work with Spielberg again.
Let's do
Like
some-
do
let's
something with,
do
with,
some-
with
It
Steven
sounds
while
like
he's still doing
she-
stuff.
It sounds like she's enjoyed the executive role, and she's thinking about age and retirement.
mhm.
And the way it came across is, before I retire, I want to step back into just the
I
filmmaking
want to
side
make some
of
more
things.
movies. Yeah.
I want to make some more movies, and I want that to be my segue out of like, this has been great, but before I'm really done, and if anything were to happen to me, I want to make sure that I'm ending doing the things that I really, really love
that's
and
what I love the
enjoyed
most.
about the industry,
Yeah.
which for her is clearly the filmmaking side.
Yeah.
So
The last thing on the whole article, when I was writing, I wrote down a couple notes from the article when I was trying to just prepare my thoughts a little bit of what we were talking about here, and some of the main things that we had gotten from there were specifically mentioned Sean Levy over and over. That's the next one.
yeah,
So that's interesting. That sounds like that's super concrete and gives
Mhm.
me
Yeah.
a lot of hope for that. Mentions the Kinberg trilogy, which I was hopeful for because that was a huge announcement,
a trilogy.
a huge trilogy announcement that we were like, that's awesome, but also they have so many other things in the works. Is this going to be like 15 years from now? Like,
Right.
when is this going to come out?
Yeah.
So that's exciting. That sounds like she's like, we should be seeing our first script from the first movie
Yeah.
potentially by June. For
June.
that.
Yeah, coming up. Yeah.
So then my mind.
We
then,
won't see that, but
No, but then my
Yeah, I don't
and
think
then
so.
mentions. I'm
Yeah.
excited. She mentions Mangold because I like Mangold as a filmmaker a lot.
Yeah.
Not just even his
that
recent stuff,
did
but
actually
his,
bring something to mind.
Yeah.
As you're reading it, it made me think. Okay, from a creative standpoint, it's so easy, and I feel like even myself, I've caught myself in the past, few years that we've been waiting for a new movie of thinking, I'm so excited about hearing the future of where Star Wars goes after 7, 8, 9. I also really am intrigued by Legends and Old Republic, and I want to go that route.
Mm-hmm.
And it made me think when you mentioned that, from a creative standpoint, you do have to kind of say, okay, we can make these one-off movies, but what is the core direction of where we're heading? And maybe it's we want to go both of these, but we have to have a core focus. Star Wars has always had the trilogy, always had the Skywalker saga. What's the core focus? Is it the future, or is it the past?
Because you want your fan base something to look forward to, also, where they're not like, now which one is this time and this? You want them to feel
You
like
want
they have
them to feel like there's a
continuity
there is continuity and some main focus. And I hadn't really thought of it that way in the past. Of like, what is the main overall focus? And if they want to do a one-off Old Republic, Dawn of the Jedi movie, they can do that. But what is the core main focus of the storytelling? Where's the yeah, and so I hadn't really thought of it that way, but when you were mentioning that, it made me think, okay, they're clearly, based on what she had said, the focus is clearly post its future. It's post 7, 8, 9. And if they do any, Dawn of the Jedi movie, then that's kind of a one-off thing. But with the trilogy and even Sean Levy's movie all being futuristic, it's all post. That is the focus.
And so what I wrote down is speculation for the timeline, for the release timeline in my head. Because now I'm thinking, okay, let's just go on what she's actually now said, not just on stage. No, what hasn't even been mentioned is the Filoni of it all, the Filoni movie. But that, I think, she's probably not mentioning that because that's still after Ahsoka Season 2, which, by the way, if you're looking at the future of television for Star Wars, that hasn't even started filming yet. We're going to have a long stretch here where there's after Andor, there's not a single announced Star Wars television project.
They're slowing down.
So, in the article, some of the things I didn't even read was them talking about, we're reshifting our focus back to movies. Streaming has been successful and interesting, and what was great about it is we got to experiment and try out a lot of new things.
Yeah.
Which makes it sound like we experimented. It's great. We get to see people like, but they
Let's
don't
go
like
back
it.
to
Get
movies.
back to it.
Right.
So, timeline. We know Mandalorian Grogu, 2026, May 2026. Sean Levy, Star Wars film. We think that they announced that initially the Rey movie was supposed to come out. Wait, is it 2026, 2027? Did I have the
Ray?
No, for Mando. Is that 20?
Mando's
Is that next
26.
year? Is that next May?
Yeah.
Okay. And then it was initially supposed to be then December of 2026 because remember they're going to have two in the same year was going to be the Rey film. That's since been not the Rey film's not happening at that time, and they've removed that Star Wars thing from the release date.
Yeah.
Or from the calendar. So my best guess would be optimistically 2027, 2028 Sean Levy film.
Yeah.
27 something has to happen in 27.
Yeah, I would say 27 Sean Levy
because
films.
that's
They're saying that's next.
50 years May.
Yeah.
They
True.
got to hit something's got to
do
hit.
something. So I think Sean Levy movie 2027.
Yeah.
if we're gonna assume that they're not gonna immediately jump into 2 Star Wars movies a year right now, let's even just be optimistic and say every year or every other year they have a Star Wars movie. At best, Mandalorian and Grogu 27, Sean Levy 26, Sean Levy 27, Mangold, which sounds a little bit. They keep mentioning it, but it's a little bit further along than those other two just right now because he's still writing a script and stuff.
Yeah.
Maybe 28, 29. Then we have Kinberg trilogy. And now we're at a trilogy.
Now we're
3 movies.
now that's the 30s.
Now you're like 30.
32,
30, 32, and 34 maybe.
Yeah.
And that's if they do not the original trilogy of 3 years in between, but
Yeah.
the sequel trilogy, which
Yeah.
is 15, 17, and 19.
Yeah.
So now we're at 34.
And how old is Kathy then?
That's what I say. we're at 34. No, and this is not even getting to Filoni's movie yet. Or any Rey movie if it was something down the road for that. So Filoni's movie, maybe by 2035, the Filoni movie.
That's true.
Unless it's one of these years that they do 2
That's
in a
an
year.
off year. Or
in
they
between
stagger
the trilogy.
Yeah, they stagger the
Could
trilogy.
be a trilogy year where it's like
Kinda how
maybe
they did
2031.
The Star Wars stories that staggered the.
But what's crazy is we're 2025. So like when I was thinking, oh man, Mangold's movie might not be like 20 until like 2028 or 2029 of Mangold's movie. And then I thought, well, we're in 25.
I was
right
gonna say
now.
it doesn't actually
like
seem
not
that far away.
it's not that
It
far.
used to, but now we're already
It does.
there.
In the 30s seems further away.
Yeah.
But when you're still in the 20s, I'm like, well, 2025, okay. So if you're telling me maybe 2 years from now we actually hear an announcement of the cast of the Mangold movie, I would be like, oh, stuff's moving along really well.
Yeah.
Like
yeah.
they have, and then 6 months from there they have their first trailer, maybe a year out from that movie coming, and then it happens. But yeah, so there's a lot there. There's a lot of stuff. I know this episode is supposed to be about Andor. We'll talk more about Andor in the next episode because I know Nate has very short time. But do we want to wrap by giving any just brief Andor season 2 trailer thoughts, vibes, stuff that came out, and then we'll do a deep dive into it next
I'm going to
episode.
reiterate what they kind of said in the behind the scenes, which was very clearly the scale and scope of the show is it's movie. It's a movie. It's movie
insane.
quality. There's a reason why they put so much money toward this season, but even just the show as a whole, because the first season too. It looks incredible. The visuals look incredible. The quality looks great. It looks like they, just based on the trailer, did what they did the first season, which with a lot of practical effects and things, and not straight volume. It looks insane. I mean, some of the shots they reveal in the trailer, I'm watching this, I'm like, this is a movie. And the release order. The episode release order was something that also recently got announced.
Yeah,
they're releasing, because we knew ahead of time that with 12 episodes, like season 1, they had kind of in season 1 had kind of a 3-episode arc, and then it was the next 3-episode arc. It was kind of a short stories within the overall story. Well, we know that with Andor season 2, they're doing the same thing, and then there's a time jump. Then there's 3 episodes and a time jump. So they actually decided to
covering the 4 years leading up to
the 4 years leading all the way up to Rogue One. So each one is a 3 episodes time jump. So because of that, they actually are releasing 3 episodes at a time every week. And 3 episodes at a time, if the episode
Star Wars movie we're getting.
If the episode length is the same as season 1, which was between 45 and an hour long minutes, that's a movie every week. Every week
new Star
we're
Wars
getting
We're gonna get
a
4
Star
Rogue
Wars
One
movie.
prequels.
Yeah, that's insane.
We're getting a Star Wars movie every week with the quality that we're seeing. This is gonna.
Or Rogue One
yeah.
prequel
It is-
movies.
It's a good news, bad
crazy.
news for me. I think this
Yeah.
is the last time we're gonna get anything like this on streaming.
I think
Yeah.
so.
I think
I
so.
think it is.
Because you're like,
There's just no
all
way.
of this is here, and James Cameron's like, just make movies, man.
Yeah,
Yeah,
totally.
Put it all in the movie, and
Yeah.
so
exactly.
I think you're right.
enjoy this.
Yeah, I
It's-
think you're right.
Well, although, and if we're talking about wait, now I did say, I guess I said there was nothing else greenlit television-wise. It's not true. Ahsoka season 2 is the only other television thing at
Ahsoka
all
season
that's
2.
greenlit. But they haven't even begun filming that. So
Right.
that's a couple years down the road.
Yeah,
But if this is other than Ahsoka season 2, which is kind of its own thing leading into the movie. If this is the end of this like phase 1 or phase 2 or whatever this phase is of the original announced streaming stuff for Star Wars, this feels like a pretty good high note to go out on.
Man.
It does.
How about
it
the
does.
trailer given which Star Wars does not usually do? Like promoting it like we know this is going to get awards buzz.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
Boom. Quote from so-and-so.
Yes.
Boom. Quote from this. Boom.
The
like,
award-winning, like
that
from the first
the
season.
confidence
I
that comes off
appreciate
in this
that.
trailer,
Yeah.
I love.
Because you got to lobby a little bit for that stuff. It
You got
doesn't
to.
just happen by accident.
No.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you got to.
Yeah.
And I like that they're getting ahead of that of like, yeah, everyone loved season 1.
Mm-hmm.
Here's season 2, and also here's a reminder. Boom, boom. Like this should be nominated for
Yeah.
awards.
Mm-hmm.
And the
I can't wait. I can't wait. It's gonna be incredible.
there's so in I know we got to go. In the recent, I think it was in the behind the scenes maybe, when they showed this scene of like clips of this scene of these stormtroopers moving in on what looks like protesters or
Yeah,
people in the
yeah.
village. I've been seeing people talk about this because it looks so crazy and intense, and I know I didn't say I know. I don't know Tony Gilroy, but I was gonna say I have a feeling Tony Gilroy is gonna go even harder in this season, like
yeah.
even a little bit edgier or a little bit dark. Like we
Yeah.
already know from the behind the scenes stuff, they said he tried to push the envelope even more in season 1.
Yeah.
And they're like, don't have that word in there. Don't have that.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that there's going to be like F-bombs and stuff in this. Maybe there is because they did talk about that for the first season. But I had heard that there's reports that there's a specific from Legends, this specific something, I don't remember the name of it, something massacre. It's an actual thing.
The Gorman Massacre.
The Gorman Massacre is in, so you had heard this too, that is in, going to take place in this, which is essentially stormtroopers just open fire, obliterating a bunch of people in the streets.
I read a thing where people are shouting in gore, which that one scene that they're on. Yeah.
Yes, they
So-
show it. And
Which
I
is
had
what
heard,
led to Mon Mothma resigning from the Senate, and
yes.
it's really the spark of the rebellion. That's
that-
really the thing.
And I had
the
heard
main-
that- did you
yeah,
know that
because that
in-
gets out that
Mhm.
this actually is happening.
Yeah, it's completely just yeah.
And I-
Before the Empire was trying to cover up the fact that they were dictators,
Mm-hmm.
and then that
think-
gets out, and you're like, you can't cover this
Yeah.
up
I
anymore.
think it's a part of the Gorman Massacre that because I'd heard them talking about this, that in Legends or in one of the books when they reference this, one of the specifics that happens in it is Tarkin landing his ship on top of people and crushing them.
Oh my
landing his
gosh.
ship in the middle of the sea square and they have nowhere to go and he crushes them.
Oh my
So,
gosh.
I
That's
know
in
people
this is all
saying I don't-
legends.
That sounds
Yeah.
about right.
So we'll
sounds-
see.
it
It
sounds
sounds like Tarkin.
the most Tarkin move ever.
Yeah.
But this show,
That's up there with
It's
blowing
not
up a
gonna
planet.
be-
I'll say it.
no, this show is not. I mean, in some ways, it's gonna be. I think it's gonna be a lot worse. Like, it's one thing if you watch in Darth
Yeah.
Vader's destroying
go-
a
they're-
nameless planet, we can't see.
They're
the people
going
on
to
it.
highlight the.
When you see people's faces and there's like a
Here's the thing,
this,
because-
this brutality of war
yeah.
and an out of control
arrogance.
just
Because
just
they have to. It's a tricky line to show a rebellion of people rebelling, literally by definition, against the government, the empire.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to do it in a way that's not painting the rebellion as rebels, like
Mhm.
actual legitimate. We're just bad and we're
Mhm.
turning against this. They have to show how evil
Yeah.
the empire really is
Mhm.
to justify what they're doing. And so you can tear that line at the beginning when some people recognize it and some people don't,
Mm-hmm.
and you feel like, okay, like even Andor, we're like, some of what the rebels are doing is probably maybe it's questionable.
That's
like
right.
they're doing questionable things.
especially the Saw Gerrera stuff of it.
They're doing questionable things
Really
in
questionable.
name of the rebellion, and now
Mhm.
you're like,
Or Luthen.
well, I don't really agree with that. But now I feel like they have to tear that point, like they have to show the progression of the empire too, and how evil they are for the viewer to look back and be like, yes, the rebellion is justified,
Mhm.
essentially.
This is not a well, neither side was right. The
Yeah.
Empire and the rebellion.
Because there are some moments like that where you're like, I mean, even Skarsgård's speech in the first season is
Yeah.
like, I'm doing things that I'm cursed to use the tools of the enemy against them.
Yeah.
So he's
They
recognizing
need
I'm
to
doing
make it clear
things.
though
He
that
just
yes,
saw it
while
before
there
anybody
are
else
did.
people on both sides, they're doing stuff
that are
is
wrong.
brutal and bad, and even the first time we ever meet Cassian Andor, he's shooting a guy in the back who thinks he's his friend, like
Yeah.
he thinks he's helping him
Yeah.
out. Boom, and you're like, whoa.
Whoa.
And he's like, the rebellion gets dirty when
Yeah.
they're fighting
When
a
they-
war. It's not pretty.
It's not clean.
But they're
Yeah.
showing. But they'll show that. But there is a
And the
good side
yes.
and a bad side.
and the way
there
to
are
do
bad
that.
things on both sides.
Mhm.
There's a good side. There's a side.
Yeah.
There's a side who who crushes people in the streets.
That's what I mean. And the
with
way to
their
do that
ship.
is to highlight and
Yeah.
emphasize even more how bad the Empire is. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Yeah.
I can't. We'll dive
gonna
into
be
it
I
can't
also
wait.
in the
It's gonna
next
be
episode.
incredible.
I know this one took up most the Kathy interview, but there's so much in there. I figure we had to kind of just go reading some of those quotes because I couldn't believe it when I was reading the article. Like, wow, she specifically mentioned that.
Yeah.
That is
Specifically.
shaping the future of Star Wars.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is exciting. And Kathy, we know you're watching.
True.
Where's our check in the mail? Because we've been saying all this
We've
positive
been
stuff
talking
for
a lot
years.
of good
Yeah, I
stuff.
know.
We're just still
If
waiting.
I'm gonna get called a shill, I want some money
I
from
gotta
it.
have something to show
Exactly.
Yeah,
for it.
something to show for
I
it.
mean,
Yeah.
it's all right though.
Although maybe people are speculating, they're like, those Star Wars guys, they're in a different podcast studio than they
She
were
didn't- yeah.
perhaps a year
True.
ago, maybe even months ago. When you look at Nate's
She
wedding
didn't mention
date,
our project.
True.
They must be making a lot of Disney money.
When Kathy finally pays us, we'll put her check or our first $1 from Lucasfilm up on the wall.
like so people have their nice like the YouTube plaques. where we
Yeah.
see the
We'll just
signed
have
check by
a
Kathy.
$1 from Kathy when she finally decides to pay us.
It's a $1 bill. It says, "Who are you?
Who are you?
Stay away."
Take this
It's
dollar
paying
and
us to. It's
Please
pay-
go
restraining
away.
order.
It's paying us to
Yeah.
keep her name
Yeah.
out of our mouth.
That's it. Yeah. That's it. Nate, where
Well,
can people
there you
find
have
us?
it. Thanks for tuning in. We'll talk more Andor even next time. The show is right around the corner. We can't
Oh,
wait
man,
for
oh,
it.
man.
But yeah, a lot of breaking news with Kathy in the interview, and so we wanted to make sure to discuss all that. If you made it this far, thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, tell a friend about us here at Star Wars Guys. We'll catch you guys in the next one, and as always, may the Force be with you.
I can't murder my own father. Well, then the Empire's already won. Like, first of all, Luke just said, "Gotcha." That was a trick. I used the
gotcha.
word murder, and
Can't
you
believe
said,
you fell for that.
Yeah, how
Luke.
could you not? Yoda, are we doing this? Confused he is. Like it's, immediately, it should have been like, Obi-Wan, sit on the log a little bit.
I
Just
mean,
think for a
Think
second.
about what you're
Sit
saying.
on that
What you're
log.
saying. I used the word murder.
Right.
Yeah, murder. Well, then the Empire's already won. Well, there's no. You're condoning murder.
You have
now
to.
we're not
You
defending.
have to murder your father. It's
You
in
have
the
to murder your
Jedi
father.
texts.
And then I love,
It's a
I love that
sacred
Luke's like, not only did I not have to murder him, I turned him back. I'm so glad I didn't listen to you.
Yeah.
We all